When I bought the lakefront property 2 years ago, I thought I was purchasing peace, a quiet retreat from the chaos of city life. The house sat on a gentle slope, overlooking a private marina I had painstakingly restored from decades of neglect. The wooden docks gleamed under the sun, the boats rocked softly in the water, and the sound of wind against the sails became my daily rhythm. It was a little piece of paradise until the homeowners association got involved. The HOA in our community wasn't particularly notorious when I moved in, at least not at first. It seemed organized, mildly strict, and mostly concerned with keeping lawns trimmed and mailboxes uniform. But then came her, the newly elected president, a woman whose voice could cut through glass, and whose sense of authority was matched only by her love of confrontation. Her name was Karen. Karen lived 3 houses up the hill, in a massive colonial-style home that screamed old money and overinflated ego. The time we met, she arrived at my door uninvited, clipboard in hand, wearing an oversized hat and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She called it a friendly HOA welcome visit, but the questions she asked made it sound more like an interrogation. Who built my dock? Did I have permits? Was I open to community use of the marina? At the time, I didn't think much of it. I had the paperwork, the licenses, and the deed that clearly showed the marina as private property, attached solely to my parcel. I had purchased it separately, ensuring full ownership. The previous owner had been a retired naval engineer who kept everything meticulously documented. There were no gray areas, at least, none that I could see. But Karen thrived in gray areas. She found them, twisted them, and expanded them into loopholes large enough to justify her intrusions. For months, she kept showing up with minor complaints: my non-standard fence color, the unapproved size of my boat canopy, even the noise level of my small generator. She claimed it violated community guidelines, though no such clauses existed in the HOA handbook. Each time, I provided proof, calmly, professionally. Each time, she left in a huff, muttering something about reviewing it with the board. The board, of course, was just her and 2 neighbors too intimidated to challenge her. It wasn't until the annual summer kickoff that things truly spiraled. Every year, the HOA hosted a neighborhood lake access day, supposedly celebrating shared enjoyment of community resources. Except the lake wasn't community-owned. The HOA only owned a small beach on the opposite side. My marina, fenced, gated, and distinctly marked private property, was not part of it. Still, Karen, in her usual commanding tone, told everyone the event would be held by the docks. When I confronted her about the flyer circulating through the neighborhood, she gave me that smile again, the kind that preceded a storm. She claimed the spirit of community allowed residents to access common shoreline facilities. I corrected her. My marina wasn't one of them. She pretended not to hear me. On the morning of the event, I watched from my porch as a convoy of SUVs rolled up my drive. Kids jumped out, coolers opened, and folding chairs appeared on my dock. My gate, which had been locked the night before, now hung open. Someone had cut the chain. Karen stood at the edge of the pier like she owned it, waving her arms as if orchestrating a parade. She'd set up a small table for herself, complete with a clipboard and a loudspeaker, greeting guests like a hostess at a private resort. I walked down, calm but cold. She didn't look at me when I approached, just told a group of teenagers to make themselves at home. That was the moment I realized this wasn't ignorance. It was entitlement, pure and calculated. She wanted control, and my marina was her stage. I said nothing that day. Instead, I took photos of every car parked illegally on my property, every person trespassing beyond the gate, every cooler dumped on my dock. Karen was too busy playing host to notice. When the crowd finally dispersed that evening, leaving behind trash and empty drink cans, I quietly relocked the gate. This time, with a reinforced chain and a heavy-duty padlock. For a week, the neighborhood buzzed. Karen had announced plans for more community gatherings at the Marina, even implying she'd finally restored fair access to shared amenities. The gossip spread fast. Some neighbors congratulated her, others quietly questioned her authority. I received a few awkward apologies from people who'd attended, unaware they were trespassing. Then came the email, long, formal, and dripping with false professionalism. "Dear resident," it began, "as per HOA policy, and under Article 3, subsection B, any lakefront structures adjacent to the community perimeter are deemed part of common recreational property, accessible to residents during sanctioned events. Failure to comply will result in fines and disciplinary action." It was absurd. That subsection didn't even exist in the bylaws. She had fabricated it. I spent that entire night reviewing my property deed again, scanning every clause and map notation. The Marina's outline was clearly marked Lot 14B, private dock area, sole ownership. I even confirmed it through the county office the next morning. My legal rights were airtight. But Karen didn't care about legalities. She cared about control. That weekend, she tried again. I heard the laughter first, the sound of people walking down toward the lake, the metallic rattle of my gate being tugged. When she found it sealed with a new chain, she lost it. From my porch, I could hear her shouting, her voice echoing over the water, accusing me of locking the community out. She rattled the gate, demanding it be opened. Her guests stood behind her, confused and uncomfortable. I stayed inside, watching through the window, the camera quietly recording everything. After nearly 10 minutes of yelling, she stormed off, red-faced and furious. But the way she looked back over her shoulder told me it wasn't over. Something darker was brewing. The following morning, I found tire marks across my driveway, fresh, muddy, deliberate. My mailbox had been knocked off its post. And there, taped to my gate, was a printed notice. Official HOA warning, unauthorized restriction of common property access. It was signed Karen, HOA President. That's when I knew this wasn't just a feud anymore. It was war. And I wasn't about to lose my Marina or my sanity to a self-appointed dictator with a clipboard. As I stood there by the sealed gate, the sun rising over the lake, I decided something once and for all. If Karen wanted a battle, she was going to get one. Because peace only lasts until someone mistakes your silence for surrender. And mine was officially over. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Emails from the HOA. Notifications of violation reports. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee before realizing Karen had escalated fast. She'd filed 5 separate complaints against me overnight. Unauthorized fencing, obstruction of community access, hostile conduct toward residents, non-compliance with HOA event coordination, and, the most absurd of all, damage to community reputation. It was almost impressive how quickly she'd weaponized bureaucracy. I could practically picture her at midnight, sitting at her kitchen counter, her laptop glowing as she drafted each accusation, smirking at every keystroke. At first, I tried to reason with the process. I sent a calm, professional response to the HOA's generic inbox, attaching copies of my deed, photographs of the property lines, and even a county assessor's map clearly showing the Marina as privately owned. Within an hour, the message bounced back. The account was temporarily disabled. That's when it hit me. Karen controlled the HOA email. She was the HOA. By noon, she'd plastered notices all over the community bulletin board at the entrance of our subdivision. Property violation under review, one read. Pending compliance hearing, said another. My name and address were printed in bold. It was public shaming, wrapped in bureaucratic formality. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when I passed them on my morning walk. Others whispered. A few, to their credit, came by quietly to tell me they thought Karen had gone too far. One even mentioned that she'd been bragging about reclaiming the marina for the people. Apparently, she was calling it the community dock. Now, I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that the truth was on my side. That reason would eventually win. But I underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. A few days later, I came home to find two men standing at the marina gate. They wore reflective vests, clipboards in hand. They said they were property assessors, sent by the HOA to evaluate compliance with shoreline access regulations. They couldn't answer a single question about who hired them. No identification, no permits, nothing. I refused them entry. One of them looked uncomfortable, muttered something about just doing our job, and they left. But not before taking several photos over the fence, including of my locked gate and private property sign. That evening, another email appeared, this time from Karen's personal address. As you continue to resist HOA authority, please be advised that further obstruction will be treated as non-cooperation and could result in legal escalation. The community has the right to access all waterfront amenities under Article 3, subsection B. We will proceed accordingly. The same imaginary clause again. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the county's zoning office. They confirmed once more that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my marina. The only governing authority was the county's waterfront department, and they had no active cases or complaints on file. That gave me a small sense of relief, but Karen wasn't slowing down. The following weekend, I discovered something that pushed me over the edge. Karen had organized another event. This time, she called it the Summer Shoreline Festival. The flyer was everywhere at the grocery store, the clubhouse, even taped to my mailbox. And once again, it listed my marina as the venue. Community dock, bring your boats, your coolers, and your family. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how easily she was manipulating people. How, with a few words and a fake rule, she'd convinced half the neighborhood to trespass on my land. But this time, I was prepared. Early Saturday morning, I installed a new lock, heavy-duty, weatherproof, reinforced steel. I placed visible no trespassing signs at every corner of the fence, citing the legal code for private property. I even printed copies of the county's ownership map and taped them to the gate. If she wanted a show, I'd give her one backed by evidence. By noon, cars started arriving again. Laughter, chatter, music. Karen was in full control, standing near the lake in a bright red dress, shouting orders like a commander. Except this time, her crowd stopped short at the gate. She hadn't expected it to be sealed again. I watched from the porch as confusion spread. Parents squinted at the signs. A few kids tugged at the fence. Karen's confident smile faltered when she realized I wasn't bluffing. Then, the screaming started. From across the yard, her voice carried like a foghorn. She accused me of defacing community property, of illegally fortifying a shared area. Her words echoed across the water, attracting even more attention. I stayed calm, still watching, still recording. She marched up to the gate, pulling and yanking at it. When it didn't budge, she turned to the crowd and declared that I was violating HOA law. Some people clapped, others looked uneasy. One man even whispered, "Isn't this his property?" Loud enough for her to hear. That only fueled her fury. She stormed off, pulling out her phone, making what I assumed were frantic calls. Within 30 minutes, a patrol car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, approached the gate, and spoke with Karen for several minutes. I watched from my porch as she pointed repeatedly toward my house, gesturing wildly. The officers eventually walked up to me. They were polite, professional. They said there had been a complaint about denied access to shared property. I calmly handed them my documentation, the deed, the property map, the county verification letter. They reviewed it carefully, exchanged glances, then returned to Karen. The conversation didn't last long. Within minutes, the patrol car drove away. Karen stood frozen, red-faced, while the crowd slowly dispersed. When she finally noticed me watching, she glared that sharp, burning glare of someone whose power had just cracked in half. Then she turned, gathered her clipboard, and stormed back up the hill. The lake went silent again. Only the sound of water tapping against the dock remained. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. That maybe, finally, she'd realized she'd lost. But Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly. The next morning, I found something even worse than before. Someone had dumped trash bags all over the Marina gate. Empty beer bottles, food wrappers, and torn signs. Scrawled across one in red paint were the words, "Community property. You can't own the lake." That's when I realized she wasn't just angry anymore. She was unhinged. This wasn't about rules or rights or HOA policy. This was personal. And something told me the next move she made would be far more than noise. Because when people like Karen lose control, they don't stop. They double down. The air around the marina had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. The stillness of the lake felt heavy, tense, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for the next act in whatever drama Karen was scripting in her mind. For days after the festival fiasco, I kept to myself. The gate remained sealed, the security cameras fully operational, and I made a habit of checking the footage every night before bed. Not out of paranoia, or so I told myself, but out of practicality. After all, my property had already been vandalized once, and with Karen's temper, it wasn't far-fetched to expect more. At first, the recording showed nothing but raccoons and the occasional jogger passing by the fence line. But on the fifth night, I noticed movement shadows flickering just beyond the gate around midnight. 2 figures, hooded, moving quietly, deliberately. They didn't approach the cameras directly, but I caught glimpses, someone shining a flashlight along the hinges of the lock, another holding what looked like a set of bolt cutters. They worked for several minutes before the video cut off in static, as if the signal had been jammed. When I walked down to the marina the next morning, the evidence was clear. The lock was dented, the chain partially cut, and there were muddy footprints leading away toward the tree line. Whoever it was hadn't made it inside, but they were close. I filed a report with local law enforcement. The deputy who came out was sympathetic but cautious. He said without catching someone in the act, there wasn't much they could do. He did, however, note the HOA tension in his report. He'd heard Karen's name before. Apparently I wasn't the first neighbor to have issues with her. That same afternoon, I noticed something else. Karen hadn't been seen since the failed event. Her driveway sat empty. No SUVs, no cars, no sign of her presence. It should have been a relief, but it only made me uneasy. Karen didn't vanish quietly. By evening, the quiet became oppressive, the kind of silence that hums just before a storm. And that's when I heard the sound. Metal scraping, then a dull clank, coming from the marina. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the slope. The beam of light cut through the mist hanging over the lake. The air smelled damp and cold. As I neared the gate, I saw it. The lock had been fully severed this time. The chain dangled loose, swinging slightly in the breeze. Someone had broken in. I pushed the gate open cautiously, the hinges creaking like a warning. My dock stretched ahead, moonlight shimmering off the planks. Everything looked still, but something felt off. The way the water rippled unnaturally, the faint sound of fabric rustling somewhere near the boats. Then I saw it. One of my boats, a small motor skiff, was untied and drifting loosely against the dock. Its rope lay cut, and there, on the seat, was a plastic cup half filled with something that hadn't been there before. Someone had been here, and recently. I moved slowly down the dock, my boots echoing against the wood. That's when I noticed footprints, wet, bare, leading from the end of the dock to the shore. They vanished into the shadows near the trees. I called the police again. This time, they sent a patrol to sweep the area. They found no one, but they did find a few things left behind: a half-eaten sandwich, an empty wine bottle, and a small blue cooler with the HOA logo stickered on its lid. Karen's signature, quite literally, all over it. When the deputy returned to his car, he turned to me with a knowing look. "You might want to get motion lights down here," he said. "And maybe more cameras." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, watching the live feed from my new cameras, every sound outside setting my nerves on edge. Around 2 a.m., movement flashed across the screen again, not near the marina this time, but near the side of my house. A shape, then another. I froze. One of the figures crept close to my garage, holding something long and metallic, a crowbar maybe. The other lingered near the fence line, whispering. I couldn't make out their faces under the hoods, but I recognized the posture, that rigid, self-assured stance I'd seen too many times before. Karen. She was here. I called 911 immediately, keeping my voice low, watching every frame of the live feed as the two figures moved along the side of my property. By the time the patrol car arrived, they were gone, slipping away into the woods like ghosts. When the officers searched the area, they found the crowbar and a discarded pair of gloves by the fence, both damp, recently used. The deputy's patience wore thin. He promised to speak with the HOA president personally and make it clear that any further incidents would be treated as criminal trespass. But when he visited Karen's home the next morning, she wasn't there. Her car was gone again. Instead, her assistant, a meek woman named Donna, answered the door. She told the deputy that Karen had taken some personal time away to de-stress. She even handed him a statement that Karen had written preemptively, claiming she was being harassed and targeted by an aggressive neighbor, intent on monopolizing community space. She was already trying to rewrite the narrative. When the deputy left, I received a letter in my mailbox, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a single page, printed in bold letters. "You can't fence off what doesn't belong to you. The community will take back what's ours, one way or another." No signature, no proof, but I didn't need any. The next few days were a blur of tension. I reinforced my locks, upgraded the cameras again, and stayed home as much as possible. Every car that passed by felt suspicious. Every noise at night sent my pulse racing. Then, 3 nights later, it happened again, only worse. This time, they didn't just cut the chain. They pried the gate off its hinges entirely. The footage caught it: all 3 people, all in dark clothing, working together. They hauled the gate into the bushes and started dragging my dock furniture toward the water. When the police arrived, the vandals were gone. The dock chairs were floating in the lake, half sunk. The private property sign was missing. And on the gatepost, someone had spray-painted 3 words in red. Karen was right. The deputy took the evidence, photographed everything, and promised to step up patrols. But I could see in his eyes this was becoming something far beyond typical. Neighbor disputes. That night, as I stood by the ruined gate, I looked out over the dark water and saw it faint, but clear. A small boat drifting near the far shore, its light flickering once before vanishing. I didn't know if it was her, but something told me it was. Karen wasn't retreating anymore, she was escalating. And if she thought breaking in would make me back down, she was about to learn the hard way. I wasn't going anywhere. The marina was mine, and I was done playing defense. The weeks that followed the break-in felt like living under siege. Every day began the same way: checking the cameras, photographing the marina, documenting every new scratch, dent, or misplaced item. It became routine, methodical, defensive, exhausting. I wasn't guarding a home anymore. I was defending territory. The HOA board had gone quiet, suspiciously quiet. No emails, no phone calls, no new complaints. That silence should have been comforting, but in this neighborhood, quiet usually meant plotting. Karen's absence only deepened the unease. Her house still looked abandoned, no lights, no cars, no movement. And yet, I knew she was still pulling strings somewhere behind the scenes. Then, one gray morning, the storm broke. A thick envelope appeared in my mailbox, marked Certified Legal Notice. Inside was a formal summons. The HOA, led by President Karen, on behalf of the community, was suing me for denial of access to shared property and violation of community rights. The words blurred together as I read. My jaw tightened. She'd actually done it. Attached to the complaint were fabricated exhibits, blurry photos of people standing at my gate, a false map showing my marina within community boundaries, and a handwritten note signed Witnesses, claiming I'd threatened residents attempting to enjoy shared amenities. It was a complete fiction, but it was official. She'd filed it in county court. The case summary demanded that I remove all fencing and locks, restricting lake access, and restore community entry as outlined in Article 3, subsection B, the same fake clause. She was doubling down, using the legal system to bully me into surrender. I hired an attorney the next day, a sharp, no-nonsense local who specialized in property disputes. When he read the complaint, he shook his head slowly. "This isn't a case," he said. "It's a tantrum dressed as paperwork." Still, tantrums could cost money. Court fees, filings, weeks of stress. Karen knew that. That was her play, not to win, but to wear me down. Over the next month, the neighborhood transformed into a whispering gallery. Some residents avoided me entirely, afraid to get caught in the crossfire. Others quietly offered support, slipping me screenshots of Karen's group emails, the ones where she painted me as hostile, unstable, even dangerous. She claimed I'd been hoarding waterfront privileges and physically intimidating people who approached the dock. She attached photos of herself at the Marina gate, standing with arms crossed, glaring like a martyr. And unbelievably, some believed her. When the first court hearing came around, I walked into the small county courthouse with a folder so thick it could have been a brick. My lawyer and I had everything: the deed, the maps, the video evidence of the trespassing, and copies of the HOA bylaws. Karen was already there, standing near the door in her signature red blazer, surrounded by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She didn't look at me at first. She was too busy talking to her attorney, a man who seemed half confused about what he'd been dragged into. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The case title sounded surreal when it echoed through the courtroom. Homeowners Association versus my name. Karen's lawyer went first, reading a long, meandering statement about community unity and historical shared access to the lake. He referenced the mysterious Article 3 clause repeatedly, waving around a highlighted copy of the bylaws. When my lawyer stood, he asked one question: "Could you please show us which page that article appears on?" The silence that followed was glorious. Karen's attorney flipped through the binder, his face growing paler by the second. There was no Article 3, no subsection B, not even a remotely similar clause. My lawyer handed over the official, unaltered HOA bylaws obtained directly from the county filing office. The judge skimmed the documents, then looked up over her glasses. "Counsel," she said calmly, "it appears your client is referencing non-existent regulations." Karen shifted in her seat. The red blazer suddenly looked too bright, too loud. My lawyer continued, laying out the evidence methodically: the deed, the property map, the recorded trespassing, the AVRD vandalism. When he mentioned the midnight break-ins, the judge's eyebrow arched slightly. By the end of the hearing, it was clear how this would go. The judge ordered an immediate dismissal of the complaint, citing lack of standing and fabricated claims. Then, in a twist I hadn't expected, she scheduled a follow-up review to consider sanctions against the HOA for filing a fraudulent suit. Karen's mask cracked then, just a flicker of disbelief, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Her lawyer muttered something to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared at me across the courtroom, her eyes narrow and glassy. It was over, at least legally. But the thing about people like Karen, they don't accept losing in public. They just retreat long enough to find another weapon. In the days after the hearing, I noticed a shift. The HOA newsletter that used to arrive monthly now included small digs at me, anonymous community reminders about neighborly behavior and respecting shared values. Subtle, but pointed. Then, one evening, a new notice appeared taped to my front door. It wasn't legal this time, just venom on paper. You may have fooled the judge, but everyone knows what you're really doing. The lake belongs to all of us, and we will never stop reminding you. No signature again, just that same manic certainty. That night, I poured myself a drink and walked down to the marina. The water was calm, moonlight spilling across the dock. For the first time in months, it actually felt peaceful again. But peace didn't last. 2 nights later, around 1 a.m., the cameras caught a new visitor, a single figure, moving slowly, carrying what looked like a gas can. The footage froze on the face just before the signal cut out. It wasn't Karen this time. It was one of her board members, the quiet one, the man who never said a word in meetings. The next morning, I found scorch marks on the side of the dock. It, too, hadn't caught fire, thank God. But the message was clear. If they couldn't take it by law, they'd take it by intimidation. The deputy came out again, this time with a fire investigator. The report was logged as attempted arson. When word spread through the neighborhood, the tide finally began to turn. People started whispering, but not about me, about her. About how far Karen had gone, how her obsession had dragged everyone into chaos. The HOA board quietly called an emergency meeting. For the first time, Karen wasn't leading it. She wasn't even invited. Rumor had it, several members had petitioned to have her removed. The next week, a letter arrived from the HOA. Short, formal, almost embarrassed. Effective immediately, Karen last name, is no longer affiliated with the Homeowners Association board. Just like that, she was out. I should have felt victorious, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew her story wasn't finished. The kind of fury that it consumed her didn't just vanish when stripped of power. It simmered, waiting. And sure enough, that night, as I stood once more by the newly repaired gate, I saw it again across the lake, a faint light, moving slowly on the water, just far enough to stay out of reach. Someone was watching, and I already knew who. For a few fleeting weeks, life felt almost normal again. The HOA, stripped of Karen's leadership, went quiet. The board restructured, neighbors softened, and the tension that had suffocated the community began to lift. The marina, once a battlefield, returned to being what it was meant to be, peaceful, still, and mine. But underneath that calm, I sensed something festering. Karen had vanished completely from sight, but she lingered like a shadow no one wanted to talk about. Every now and then, her name would slip into conversation, a whispered, "Did you hear?" at the grocery store, or a muttered, "I think she's back in town." But no one really knew. She'd been voted out of the HOA, humiliated in court, and socially exiled from her own clique. For someone like Karen, that kind of defeat wasn't the end. It was gasoline on a slow-burning fire. And soon, that fire would stop being metaphorical. It was a Friday night in early autumn, the kind of evening where the air felt thick with change. The trees around the lake had begun to blush with orange and red. The water reflected every fading ember of sunset. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee and listening to the crickets, trying to convince myself the worst was behind me. Then, a strange scent drifted in on the wind, faint, sharp, chemical. Not the earthy smell of a campfire, but the artificial tang of gasoline. I set down my cup and walked down toward the marina. The darkness swallowed the edges of the lake, broken only by the glow of my dock lights. Everything looked normal at first. The gate was locked, the fence unbroken. But as I stepped closer, I saw it. A trail of dark liquid snaking from the gate toward the wooden planks. My pulse quickened. The smell was stronger here, heavy and undeniable. I turned the flashlight downward. The glimmer of fuel danced across the wood. Someone had doused part of the dock. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted back to the house, grabbed my phone, and called 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, a sound split the air behind me, the sudden whoosh of ignition. The dock was on fire. Flames erupted in a line, leaping from one plank to the next, consuming the wood with terrifying speed. The orange glow reflected off the water, painting the lake in wild, flickering light. The sound was like thunder, cracking, hissing, devouring. I grabbed my garden hose, though I knew it was pointless. The fire was too fierce, too fast. The heat pushed me back. Sparks jumped toward the fence. Embers scattered across the grass. The fire department arrived within minutes, their sirens slicing through the night. Neighbors began pouring out of their houses, gathering along the street, their faces pale and stunned. Someone shouted that they'd seen a figure running from the woods, a woman, sprinting toward the far side of the lake. Karen. Even before they said it, I knew. The firefighters worked furiously to contain the blaze. By the time the flames died, half the dock was gone. Charred beams jutted out over the black water like broken bones. The air reeked of smoke and melted plastic. I stood there, numb, as the lead firefighter approached. He said what I already suspected. The fire was deliberately set. The accelerant used was consistent with gasoline. The source likely a single point near the gate, intentionally lit. An investigation was launched immediately. The sheriff's office collected samples, took photos, and assured me they'd get to the bottom of it. But as I watched the water ripple with dying embers, I knew they wouldn't have to look far. Karen had made her threat weeks ago. The community will take back what's ours, one way or another. The next day, I met with my attorney again. He was furious, not just about the arson, but about the escalation. She's crossed a line, he said. This isn't HOA nonsense anymore. This is criminal. We filed for a restraining order. By the afternoon, it was granted. Copies went out to the HOA, the sheriff's department, and directly to Karen's last known address. But by the time the deputy arrived there to serve it, she was gone again. No one had seen her since the fire. Her car was found abandoned at a gas station 10 miles away. The security camera footage showed her filling a plastic container and driving off. After that, nothing. The story spread quickly. Local news picked it up. Former HOA president under investigation after lakefront fire. The headline turned my quiet neighborhood into a circus. Reporters parked at the entrance, snapping photos, asking questions. Some neighbors avoided me, afraid to be associated with the chaos. Others apologized, admitting they'd believed her lies. One man confessed he'd even helped her print flyers for the so-called community marina events. His voice cracked when he said he didn't know it would come to this. Days passed, then a week. The fire investigation continued, but progress was slow. The lakefront remained taped off, the dock half-sunken and skeletal. I spent my nights replaying the footage from that evening, over and over, looking for any clue. But the cameras near the gate had gone dark. Seconds before the fire started, the wires cut clean. It was deliberate, calculated, personal. Then, one night, almost 2 weeks after the fire, I woke to a sound, a thud, soft, deliberate. Coming from the porch, I froze. listening. Another thud, this one closer to the door. I grabbed my phone, opened the security app, and checked the front camera. There she was, Karen, standing on my porch in the middle of the night. Her hair disheveled, her clothes soaked, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked feral, no clipboard, no blazer, just a shaking figure under the porch light. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't demanding. She was just staring. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and pressed a hand against the door. Her mouth moved, but the camera had no audio. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read her lips. It's mine. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Within minutes, the sirens blared again. The deputies arrived fast. This time I'd hit the panic alert as soon as I saw her. But when they surrounded the house, she was gone. Vanished into the trees like she'd melted into the night. They searched for hours. Nothing. That was the last time I ever saw her in person. The investigation into the fire eventually concluded with an arrest warrant, arson, trespassing, destruction of property. But Karen never showed up in court. The warrant went unserved. She disappeared entirely. Some said she fled the pretender state. Others whispered that she'd been hiding near the lake, somewhere in the woods, watching. Months later, when the insurance finally cleared and I rebuilt the marina, I found something buried near the fence. A small metal plaque, half rusted, half burned. The inscription read, "Community Property, established 1994. I didn't install it. Neither did the previous owner. It was her last mark, her delusion, immortalized in steel. I stood there on the new dock, the wind pushing gentle ripples across the water, and realized something unsettling. Karen might be gone, but her presence had rooted itself into the place. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind felt like her whispering from the trees, a reminder that obsession never really dies. It just waits for the next chance to reignite. Winter settled over the lake like a cold, heavy silence. The charred remains of the old dock were long gone, replaced by new wood, new lights, and a reinforced steel gate. The HOA had been restructured completely. The new board was small, quiet, and distant. No more community barbecues, no more open marina events. People kept to themselves now, almost reverently. It had been nearly 6 months since the fire, 6 months since Karen vanished. In that time, peace had returned, but it wasn't the comforting kind. It was brittle, fragile, the kind that made you listen too closely to the smallest sounds. The groan of the dock, the wind through the trees, the occasional scrape of something unseen along the fence at night. I tried to tell myself it was over, that Karen was gone for good, that the lake had finally been reclaimed not by her, not by the HOA, but by nature. But peace built on fear never lasts. It started small, missing mail, a gate left unlocked when I was certain I'd latched it. Once, I found footprints in the frost outside my boathouse. Bare footprints. I checked the cameras again. Nothing but static. The tech guy I hired said the interference came from signal disruption, like someone nearby was deliberately jamming them. I didn't tell him who I suspected. By early February, the weather had turned cruel. The lake froze at the edges. The trees creaked like old bones. The whole neighborhood seemed asleep. Even the HOA meetings had stopped. No one wanted to gather anymore. It was as if the community itself had gone into hiding. Then one night, as I was reviewing old footage, the last clean recording before the fire, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In the frame, just seconds before the flames appeared, there was a reflection in the water. Not of me, not of any light, but of a face. Watching from the far side of the lake, Karen. The realization chilled me deeper than the winter air. Because if that was her reflection then, and I'd seen footprints now, she might still be here, living out there, waiting. That night, I walked to the edge of the dock. The lake was calm, silent, except for the slow cracking of ice. My breath fogged in the cold air. I stood there, looking out into the blackness, half expecting her to step out from the trees. Nothing, just darkness. I turned back toward the house and froze. There, on the dock behind me, sat something small and metallic, a plaque, the same kind she'd left months before. But this one wasn't old. It was new, freshly engraved. Community reclaimed. My hands went cold. The gate was locked, it always was. No one should have been able to get in without cutting through the chain or scaling the fence. I checked everything, the latch, the padlock, the hinges, all untouched. It didn't make sense. I took the plaque inside, wrapped it in a towel, and set it on the kitchen counter. I sat across from it for hours, staring at the words, wondering if it was meant as a warning or a promise. The next morning, I called the sheriff. They sent a deputy to inspect the property again. He walked the perimeter, checked the gates, even searched the tree line. Nothing. But when he came back, he looked uneasy. "There's something you should see," he said. He led me around the side of the marina, near the waterline. The thin layer of frost had been disturbed, long, uneven streaks cutting across the mud. It looked like something heavy had been dragged from the forest to the water. And then the drag marks ended, right at the edge. The deputy took a photo, shook his head, and said they'd patrol the area for a few days. But I could tell from his tone he didn't expect much. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every rustle outside pulled me from half-dreams of fire and smoke. And then, sometime around 3 a.m., I heard it a knock. Soft, steady. Coming from the back door this time. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The knocking came again. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. I reached for my phone, but before I could call anyone, the motion light outside flicked on. She was there, Karen, standing by the glass door, soaked and shaking, her face pale as the snow around her. Her hair hung in wet strands over her shoulders, her eyes locked on mine, but there was something different about her this time. Not the fury I'd seen before, not the smug arrogance of an HOA queen. She looked hollow. She raised one hand, slowly, and pressed it against the glass. Her fingers left streaks of water on the pane. Her lips moved again, forming those same silent words. "It's mine." Before I could react, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. When they came back on, she was gone. I ran outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the yard. Her footprints led from the door toward the dock, fading as they reached the frozen shore. The ice near the edge was cracked, the water below still rippling. The sheriff's department searched the lake the next morning. They found her scarf caught on a branch near the bank, half frozen, torn. But no body, no trace. Some said she must have fallen through the ice. Others believed she'd fled for good this time. But every time I walk the dock, I feel it. That sense that someone is still there, watching, waiting. A few months later, spring arrived. The ice melted, the trees bloomed, and the lake returned to life. The HOA finally dissolved, citing safety concerns and community division. The properties went quiet. One by one, people sold their homes and moved away. I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because it felt wrong to leave. The marina still stands calm, still deceptively peaceful. Some nights, when the air is perfectly still, I hear the faintest echo across the water, the sound of wood creaking, a soft splash, and the whisper of a woman's voice carried by the wind. They say lakes hold memories that water remembers. And I think this one remembers everything. The arguments, the fire, the obsession, and her, especially her. Sometimes, when the moonlight hits the water just right, I swear I see a figure standing on the opposite shore, motionless, watching, always watching. I tell myself it's just reflection, just imagination. But I know better. Karen never really left. She's part of this place now. A ghost not of death, but of entitlement, anger, and something far worse, a belief that she still owns it all. The lake, the dock, the community. And maybe, in some way, she does. Because even now, when the night is quiet and the water is still, I can almost hear her voice rise softly from the dark, a whisper carried by the ripples, common property. And I realize that peace, in places like this, is never permanent. It's just the silence between storms.